Chapter 2, A Coal Miner's Grave. It was snowing the day we buried Daddy, but I didn't feel the cold flakes on my face or the wind blowing in my hair when we walked to the church afterward. When we walked behind the hearses to the cemetery. Daddy and two other miners' caskets were side by side in front of the church. One casket really indistinguishable from another, even though I knew Daddy was the tallest of the three and the youngest. The church was filled with miners and their families, store owners and Mommy's friends and co-workers at Francine's salon, as well as some of my school friends. Bobby Lockwood looked very uncomfortable. He didn't know whether or not to smile at me or just look sad. He shifted in his seat as if sitting on an anthill. I gave him a tiny smile for which he looked grateful. I hear lots of sobbing and noses being blown. Way in the rear of the church, someone's baby cried. She cried throughout the service. It seemed fitting. Papa George said there should have been more representatives from the mining company there, and that the mine should have been shut down for a few days in honor of the dead. He and Grandma Arlene walked beside Mommy and me when we followed the hearses to the cemetery. Except for the crunchy sound of everyone's footsteps on the snow and the far-off wail of a train carrying away coal, it was terribly quiet. I actually welcomed Papa George's stream of compliments. He said that if there hadn't been an oil embargo to put the pressure on the coal miners, my daddy wouldn't have been killed. Company saw dollar signs, he charged, and pushed the miners too far. But it ain't the first time, and I'm sure it ain't gonna be the last. We passed under the granite archway to the cemetery. Angels were carved in stone. Mommy kept her hood over her head and her eyes down. Every once in a while she released a deep sigh and intoned, "I wish this was over. What am I gonna do? Where do we go now? What am I gonna say to all these people?" Grandma Arlene had her arm around Mommy's and patted her hand gently and muttered back, there, be strong, Haley, be strong." Papa George remained close to me, and when we reached the gravesite, he flecked his brown eyes, filled with tears, before he lowered his head, still thick with hair, as white as the flakes that flew in our faces. The other two miners who had been with Daddy when the walls caved in were being buried on the north end of the same cemetery in Sewell. We could hear the mourners singing hymns, their voices carried by the same cold February wind that tossed the flakes over the West Virginia hills and the shanties under the gray sky. We raised our heads when the minister finished his prayer. He hurried off to say another prayer to the other two miners. Although Mommy wore black and no makeup, she still looked pretty. Sadness simply lit a different candle in her eyes. Her rich maple brown hair was pinned back. She had bought a plain black dress just for the funeral and wore a hooded cape. The hem of the dress reached only a few inches below her knees, but she didn't appear cold, even though the wind whipped her skirt around her legs. She was in a daze even deeper than mine. I grasped her hand much more tightly than she held mine. I imagined that if Grandma Arlene and I were to let go of Mommy's arms, she would just float away in the wind, like a kite whose string had snapped. I knew how much Mommy would rather be anywhere but here. She hated sadness. If anything happened to make her unhappy, she would pour herself a gin and tonic and play her music louder, drowning out in melancholy. I gazed at Daddy's coffin a final time, still finding it hard to believe that it was really him shut inside. Soon, any moment, the lid would pop open and Daddy would sit up laughing, telling it was all just a joke. I almost laughed, imagining it, hoping for it. But the lid remained shut tight, the snowflakes dancing over its shiny surface, some sticking and melting into tears. The mourners filed past, some hugging Mommy and me, some just pausing to touch hands or shake their heads. Everyone said the same thing, sorry for your trouble. Mommy kept her head down most of the time, and I had to greet the people and thank them. When Bobby took my hand, I gave him a small hug. He looked embarrassed, mumbled something, and then hurried off with his friends. I couldn't blame him, but it made me feel like a leper. I noticed that most people were awkward and distant around us, as if tragedy was something you could catch like a cold. Afterward, we all walked back to the cemetery from the cemetery more quickly than we'd walked to it, especially Mommy. The snow fell faster and harder, and now that the funeral was over, I felt the cold cut right through my bones. The other two miners' families and friends were getting together to eat and comfort each other. Grandma Arlene had made a pot of roast, thinking that it would be all there. But as we left the cemetery, Mama told her that we weren't going. She couldn't get away from the sadness fast enough. I can't stand any more sad faces around me, she wailed and shook her head. Folks need each other at times like this, Grandma said. Mommy just shook her head again and quickened her pace. Suddenly, Archie Marlin caught up with us in his imitation patent leather shoes and his shiny gray suit with his glossy red hair parted in the middle. Be glad to drive you home, Haley, he offered. Mommy's eyes brightened. More of the color returned to her face. Nothing could cheer her up as quickly as a man's attention. Why, thank you, Archie. That's very kind. Ain't much. I wish I could do more, he remarked, flashing me a smile. Behind us, I saw Alice widen her round eyes even more. Come on, honey, Mama reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I'll walk home with Alice, I told her. That's silly, Melody. It's cold. I'm not cold, I said, even though my teeth wanted to chatter. Suit yourself, Mommy said, and got into Archie's car. 2 large cotton dice hung from the rearview mirror, and his seats were upholstered with imitation white wool that shed on your clothes. The wiry threads were sure to get on Mommy's black dress, but she didn't care. Before we left the church, she told me she expected to throw the dress in the garbage the minute she took it off anyway. I don't intend to spend weeks mourning and wearing black, she declared. Sadness ages you, and it doesn't bring back the dead. Besides, I can't wear this black thing to work, can I? When are you going back to work, Mommy? I asked, surprised. With Daddy's death, I thought the world would stop turning. How could lives go on? Tomorrow, she said. I don't have much of a choice. We don't have anyone to support us anymore, do we? Not that it was all that much support anyway, she mumbled. Should I go back to school? I asked, more out of anger than desire to return. Of course, what are you going to do around here all day? You'll go crazy looking at these 4 walls. She wasn't wrong, but somehow it didn't seem right to simply go on with our lives as if Daddy hadn't died. I would never hear his laughter or see his smile again. How could the sky ever be blue or anything taste sweet or feel good? I would never again care about getting hundreds on tests or parading my newfound knowledge. Daddy was the only one who cared, who was proud of me anyway. Mommy gave me the feeling that education was frivolous for a girl. She believed once a girl was old enough to catch a man, nothing else mattered. Walking home from the cemetery with Alice, I felt my heart had turned into one of those large chunks of coal Daddy used to hack out of the walls hundreds of feet below the earth. The coal that had killed him. Alice and I barely spoke while we hurried toward the trailer park. We had to keep our heads bowed because the snowflakes were streaming down from the gray sky into our eyes. "Are you all right?" Alice asked. I nodded. "Maybe we should have gone with Archie in his car too," she added mournfully. The wind howled. It screamed. "I'd rather walk in a storm 10 times worse than get in his car," I said vehemently. When we entered the Mineral Acres, we saw Archie in his car parked at our trailer. And then as we drew closer, we heard the sound of Mother's laughter. Alice looked embarrassed. "Maybe I should go home." "I wish you wouldn't," I said. "We'll go into my room and close the door." "Okay." When I opened the door, we found Mommy sitting on the dinette with Archie. A bottle of gin sat on the table with some mixers and ice. "Happy now that you froze your feet walking?" Mommy asked. She'd already taken off the black dress and wore a silk blue robe. Her hair was down around her shoulders, and she had put on more lipstick. "I needed the walk," I said. Archie looked at Alice and me with a grin. "There's water on the stove if you want some tea or hot chocolate," Mommy said. "I don't want anything right now, thank you." "Maybe Alice wants something." "No thanks, Mrs. Logan." "You can tell your mother everything's clean in my house," Mommy snapped. Alice was nonplussed. "She didn't say it wasn't, Mommy." "No, really, Miss Logan, It's okay," Mommy said with a tiny ripple of nervousness laughter. Archie smiled and poured 2 more drinks. "We're going to my room," I said. "Maybe you two should have gone to the wake, Melody. I don't have anything for dinner, you know." "I'm not hungry," I said. I marched down the short corridor to my room, Alice trailing behind. After I closed my door, I threw myself on the bed and buried my face in the pillow to smother the anger building in my chest as much as my sobs. Alice sat on the bed, too frightened and amazed to speak. A moment later, we heard Mommy turn on the radio and find a station with lively music. "She's just doing that because she can't stand crying anymore," I explained. Alice nodded, but I saw that she was uncomfortable. "She says I should go back to school." "Are you?" "You should," she nodded. "It's easy for you to say. Your daddy's not dead." I regretted saying it immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that." "It's all right. I know if I live like nothing happened, I won't feel so sick inside. Only, what will I do when it's time for Daddy to be coming home from the mine? I know I'll just stand out there watching the road every day, expecting him to come walking over the hill as usual." Alice's eyes filled with tears. "I keep thinking if I stand there long enough and concentrate and hope hard enough, all this will never have happened. It will just be a bad dream. Nothing will bring him back, Melody," Alice said sadly. "His soul has gone to heaven." "Why did God put him in heaven?" I demanded, pounding my small fists on my thighs. "Why was I even born if I can't have a daddy when I need him the most?" "I'm never going back to that church," I vowed. "It's silly to think that you can hurt God back," Alice said. "I don't care." The look on her face said that she didn't think I meant what I was saying. But I did mean it, as much as I could mean anything. I took a deep breath and futilely did my outburst of anger. I don't know how we'll go on without him. I have to quit school and maybe go to work. You can't do that. I might have to. Mommy doesn't make very much money at the beauty parlor. Alice thought for a moment. There's a miner's pension and Social Security too. Mommy said it won't be enough. We heard a loud outburst of laughter coming from both Mommy and Archie. Alice grimaced. My father doesn't know how Archie keeps out of jail. Daddy said he waters the whiskey in the bar. Mommy's just trying not to be sad, I said. She'd entertain anyone right now. He just happens to be around. Alice nodded, unconvinced. I picked up my fiddle and plucked at the strings. Daddy loved to hear me play, I said, smiling, remembering. You play better than anyone I know, Alice declared. Well, I'll never play again. I threw the fiddle on the bed. Of course you will. Your daddy wouldn't want you to give it up, would he? I thought about it. She was right, but I wasn't in the mood to agree with anything anyone said right now. Another peal of laughter from Archie reached our ears. The walls of the trailer made of cupperboard. I put my hands over my ears. You're welcome to come over to my house, Alice said. My brother's the only one at home. Alice lived on one of the nicest homes in Sewell. Ordinarily, I'd love going there, but right now I felt like it was a sin to do anything enjoyable. Suddenly we heard Mommy and Archie singing along with the song on the radio, followed by their laughter again. I stood up and reached for my coat. Okay, let's get out of here. Alice nodded and followed me out of my room and down the short corridor. Mommy was sprawled on the sofa now, and Archie was standing at her feet, holding his drink in his hand. They didn't speak, and then Archie reached to turn down the volume on the radio. I'm going to Alice's house. Good idea, honey. Daddy wouldn't want you moping around the trailer. I wanted to say he wouldn't want you laughing and singing and drinking with Archie either, but I swallowed my words and pounded my feet over the thin rug to the front door. Don't be late, Mommy called after me. I didn't reply. Alice and I walked away from the trailer, the radio music turned up behind us. Neither of us spoke until we rounded toward Hickory Hill. The Morgans lived at the top, and from their living room and dining room windows, they could look down on the valley of Sewell proper. Alice's mother was proud of their home, which she told me more than one occasion was a colonial revival, a house with historical architecture. It had 2 stories and a front porch. They had an attached garage. The house had 12 rooms. The living room looked as big as our entire trailer. Alice's room was certainly twice the size of mine, and her brother Tommy's room was even bigger. The one time I looked at the master bedroom with its bathroom, I thought I'd entered a palace. Tommy was in the kitchen when we entered the house. He sat on a stool smearing a peanut butter on a piece of bread and holding the phone receiver on his ear and shoulder. The moment he saw me, his eyes widened and his eyebrows lifted. I'll call you back, Tina, he said and cradled on the receiver. I'm sorry about what happened to your father. He was a really nice guy. Thank you. He looked at Alice for an explanation in what we were doing and why she had brought me to their house. Everyone was making me feel as if I carried a disease. No one wanted to be directly confronted with sorrow as deep as mine. We're going to my room, Alice told him. He nodded. Would you like something to eat? I'm just having a snack. I hadn't really had anything substantial to eat for days, and my stomach bubbled at the suggestion. Maybe I should eat something. I'll make some sandwiches and bring them up to my room, Alice said. Mother doesn't like you to have food in your room, Alice, Tommy reminded her. She'll make an exception this time, Alice retorted. Her brother retreated from the fury of her eyes and her stern expression. I don't want to make any trouble, I said softly. I guess it'll be all right as long as you don't make a mess, Tommy relented. How's your mother doing? She's doing fine, I said hesitantly. He nodded and gazed at Alice, who continued to glare at him defiantly, and then took a bite of his sandwich. Let's go up to my room first, Alice suggested, pivoting, taking my hand, and I followed. We went quickly up the carpet winding stairway to her room. Sorry my brother's such a dork, she said. We're always fighting because he's so bossy. You can lie down if you want, she said, nodding to her fluffy pillows and comforter on her queen-size bed. It had pink posts and frilly light pink canopies. The headboard was shaped like a Valentine heart. I dreamed of having a bed like this instead of a simple mattress on box springs. I took my coat off and sat on the bed. I thought Bobby Lockwood was going to come to your house, Alice said. I knew he wouldn't. He looked terrified at church and the cemetery, I said. I know you like him, but I don't think he's that mature, Alice remarked. No one's mature when it comes to this sort of thing. I don't blame him for running away from me. If he really liked you, he would want to be with you to help you. I knew Alice hated whenever I had a boyfriend because it took me away from her. Right now, I don't care very much about boys, I said. She nodded, pleased. I'll run down and make some sandwiches and bring them up with milk, okay? Don't get in trouble on my account. I won't. Just rest and read something or turn on the television set if you want. Do anything you want, she offered. Thanks. After she left, I did lay back and close my eyes. I should be with Mommy now, and she should want to be with me, not Archie. She'll be sorry when he leaves and she's all alone in that trailer, I thought. And then I decided I wouldn't stay away that long. I kept hearing Daddy explaining her actions, getting me to understand her weaknesses. He always felt more sorry for her than he felt for himself. I was sure that he was doing the same thing right now, even though it was he and not she who was shut up in a coffin. I wondered how long it would be before my friends would stop looking at me strangely. It would be so hard to return to school, I thought. All of those pitying eyes aiming at me. I imagined even my teachers would gaze at me sorrowfully and speak to me in a softer, sadder tone. Maybe Mommy was right. Maybe it's better to pretend nothing had happened. That way other people weren't so uncomfortable in your presence. But wasn't that like slapping Daddy's memory in the face? Somehow I had to find a way to keep the sorrow private and go on with my life, as empty as it now seemed to be. If I had a brother like Alice had, I wouldn't be fighting with him all the time, I thought. Right now, a brother would come in pretty handy. He would help with Mommy, and he would have me to comfort. If he was older than me, I'm sure that he would be like Daddy. I resented Mommy for being so weak and selfish to not have another baby. She didn't have a litter, but she might have considered my need for a companion. I must have been a lot tired than I realized, for I didn't hear Alice return. She placed the sandwiches and the milk on the nightstand table beside the bed and sat reading our history assignment while she waited for me to open my eyes. It was twilight by the time I did, and the lamp was on. What happened? I asked, rubbing my cheeks with my palms and sitting up. You fell asleep. I didn't want to wake you. The milk's a little warm, but the sandwiches is all right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, eat something. You need it, Melody. I saw from the empty plate beside her and the empty glass that she had already eaten her snack. I took a deep breath and bit into the sandwich. I was afraid of what my stomach might do once food was dropped into it again. It bubbled and churned, but the sandwich tasted good and I finished it quickly. You were hungry. I guess so. Thanks. What time is it? I gazed at the small grandfather clock on her dresser. Oh, I better get home. You don't have to go if you don't want to. You could even sleep over here tonight. No, I should go home, I insisted. My mother needs me. I'm sorry I wasn't much company. That's okay. Are you going to school tomorrow? No, I'm not. I'm staying home for at least one day, I said firmly. I'll bring you all the homework and tell you what we did. Thanks. I paused and smiled at her. Thanks for being my best friend, Alice. It brought tears to her eyes and she flashed a smile at me, and then she followed me down the stairs. Her house was so quiet. My parents are showering and getting dressed for dinner, she explained. They always do that when they come home from work. Dinner is very formal in my house. That's nice, I said, pausing at the front door to gaze back at her beautiful home. It's nice to sit at a table like a family. You're lucky. No, I'm not, she said sharply, and I opened my eyes wide. We're rich, maybe, and I get the best marks in school, but you're the lucky one. What? I almost laughed. Of all days to say such a thing, I thought. You're the prettiest girl in school and everyone likes you, and someday you'll be happier than anyone. I shook my head as if she just said the dumbest thing, but she didn't soften the determination expression. You will. Alice, we heard something coming from upstairs. It was her mother. Did you bring food upstairs? I'd better go, I said quickly. Thanks. See you tomorrow, she said, and we closed the door. Somehow I didn't know how. I left feeling more sorry for her than I did for myself. When I returned to the trailer, Archie's car was gone. It was dark inside with a small lamp on in the living room. The glass of the nearly empty bottle of gin was still on the coffee table. I gazed around and listened and then walked softly to the corridor to Mommy's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, so I peeked through the opening and saw her sprawled on her stomach. Her robe was up around the backs of her knees and her arm dangled over the side of the bed. I walked in and gazed at her face. She was breathing heavily through her mouth and was in a deep sleep. I covered her with a blanket and then left to clean up the trailer. Just before I was about to go to bed myself, there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Grandma Arlene. How are you, honey? She asked, coming in. I'm all right, I said. Mommy's asleep. Good. I brought some food back from the wake for you to have. She put the covered plates on the refrigerator. No sense letting this go to waste. Thank you. She came over to me and took both my hands in hers. Grandma Arlene was a small woman, an inch shorter than I, but according to Papa George, she had a backbone tempered with steel. Although diminutive, she still seemed able to hold everyone's troubles on her shoulders. Times will be hard for a while, but just remember, we're right next door anytime you need us, Melody. Thank you, I said, my voice cracking and the tears burning under my eyelids. Get some sleep, sweetheart, she hugged me, and I hugged her right back. It broke the dam of tears, and I started to sob again. Sleep, she said softly, that's the cure. That and time. I took a deep breath and went into my room. I heard her leave, and then all was quiet. Off in the distance, the wail of a train whistle echoed through the valley. Some of the coal in those cars, I thought, might have been dug out before my daddy, someplace north. Someone shoveled the coal into the stove for a while to be warm. I shivered and wondered if I'd ever be warm again. I wondered if Grandma Arlene was right about the power of time. In the days and weeks that passed, the ache in my heart became a numbness. But that ache was always resurrected when my mind went to Daddy, or when I heard someone who sounded like him. Once I even thought I saw him walking along the road. I hated going by the mine or looking at other miners. The sight of them made my stomach tighten and sent pins into my heart. Mommy never returned to the cemetery, but I did, almost every day for the first few weeks, and then every other day after that. Everyone treated me differently at school for the first few days that I returned, but soon after my teachers spoke to me just the way they spoke to everyone else, and my friends began to stay at my side longer, talking to me more and laughing around me. Bobby Lockwood drifted away. However, he seemed interested in Helen Christopher, a 9th grader who looked more like an 11th grader. Alice, who was somehow managed to eavesdrop on conversations all day long, told me that Helen was even more promiscuous than the infamous Beverly Marks. Alice predicted it was only a matter of time, but she would be pregnant too. None of this mattered. I didn't shed a tear over Bobby's betrayal. Things that used to mean a lot now seem small and petty. Daddy's death had jerked me headlong into maturity. On the other hand, with Daddy gone, Mommy became flightier than ever. The biggest effect that Daddy's death seemed to have on her was to make her more terrified of becoming old. She spent a great deal primping herself in the vanity table, fixing her hair and debating over her makeup. She continually reviewed her wardrobe, complaining about how old and out of style her clothes were. Her talk was always about herself, the length and the shade of her hair, the puffiness of her cheeks or eyes, the firmness leaving her legs, and what this bra did for her figure as opposed to make what another one could. She never asked about my schoolwork, in between what I made for dinner and Grandma Arlene did for us. She never cooked a meal. In fact, she seldomly ever came home for dinner with me, claiming that she'd get fat. I can't eat as much fatty food as you can, Melody, she told me. Don't wait for me. If I'm not home by 6, start eating without me, she ordered. It got so she was only home for dinner once or twice a week. Mostly I ate with Grandma Arlene and Papa George. Even though Mommy was worried about her complexion and figure, she continued to drink gin and smoke. When I asked her about that, she got very angry and told me that it's the only vice that everyone needs a little vice. Perfect people end up in monasteries or nunneries and eventually go mad, she explained. I have a lot of tension now with your father gone, and I need to relax, so don't make any new problems for me, she ordered, which I knew simply meant leave me alone. I did. I wanted to complain too about how often she saw Archie and how often he was at our house, but I buttoned my lips and swallowed my words. It took so little to set Mommy off these days, and after she went on a rampage shouting and flailing about, she would break down and cry and make me feel terrible. It got so I began to feel as if I was her mother and she was my daughter. Our bills piled up, some simply because she just never got to them. Twice the phone company threatened to shut off our service once the electric company came by and warning at our door. Mommy was always making mistakes with her checking account. I had to take over the bookkeeping, do the grocery shopping, and look after the trailer. Papa George helped us with that, but Daddy's death had a big impact on him too. He looked older, sicker, and much more tired these days. Grandma Arlene was always after him to take better care of himself. However, he wouldn't stop smoking, and he even began drinking a little whiskey in the late afternoon. There were nights when I was wakened by the sound of Mommy's laughter and heard Archie's voice. Soon that laughter was coming from Mommy's bedroom. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't shut out the sounds that I knew were the sounds of lovemaking. The first time I heard that, I got so sick to my stomach I had to run to the bathroom and vomit. Mommy didn't even hear me and never asked what happened. Usually Archie was gone before I rose up in the morning, and if I heard him moving around the kitchen or the living room, I'd wait as long as I could before rising. All of this happened too quickly, far too quickly, for most people in Sewell. I knew there was a lot of gossip about us. One night, Mommy returned from work enraged. She had gotten into an argument with Miss Sampler, who has always been one of the best customers. She fought because Miss Sampler had made a remark about Mommy not spending enough time in respectful mourning. From what I heard afterward, Mommy had become so shrill and wild, Francine had asked her to leave. She was fuming and started to drink, and as she recited the argument. Who is she to tell me how to act? Does she know how hard my life is? How much I suffered? She lives in her fine house and looks down on me, judging me? Who told her to be a judge and jury? Mommy paused now, then to make sure that I was at her side. I knew it was better not to get in her way and make her more furious. Every time that she looked at me, her narrowed eyes. So I nodded enthusiastically and acted as outraged as I could. I hate these people. They think just because they have money, they can lord over us. They're so small-minded. She struggled for the right word and looked at me for a suggestion. Provincial? Yes. What's that mean? She asked. They just haven't had enough of other places to get a wider point of view, I said. She liked that. You're so smart. Good. And you're right, too. Archie's always saying the same thing. He hates this town as much as I do. And you do, she nodded. I don't hate it, Mommy. Of course you hate it. What's here for you? She gulped her cocktail and then went to the phone to call Archie and tell him what happened. I didn't realize how serious the incident at the beauty parlor had been until days later when I came home early from school and found Mommy lying on the sofa watching a soap opera. She had obviously not gotten dressed that day, and I didn't even have to ask. She saw the look on my face and told me before I could utter a question. I'm not working at Francine's anymore, she said. What? Why? We had an argument. After all those years, you'd think that he'd be more loyal to me. I broke my back for her. I did all sorts of favors, ingrate. That's what she is. That's what they all are. What are you gonna do? I'm not thinking about that right now. I'm too angry, she said, pouting. What are we gonna have for dinner? There's chicken from yesterday to warm up, and I can make some potatoes and green beans. She smirked. If that's all we have, I guess that'll be it, she said and closed her eyes. My hands shook as I prepared my dinner. What would we do now? Who's going to give Mommy a job? What sort of job could she manage? There was only one beauty salon in Sewell. Maybe what I told Alice would come true. I'd have to quit school and find a job myself. Daddy hadn't had enough of insurance. That we were getting from Social Security also wasn't enough. Besides, Mommy had spent a lot of money on new clothes, but she didn't appear worried. After all that meal was prepared, she changed her mind about not liking it. She ate and drank and talked about the blue streak over the new outfit she was getting, with matching shoes. After dinner, she went to the bedroom while I cleaned up, and she suddenly appeared in a new skirt and blouse and earrings. She modeled it all for me, and I had to admit she looked beautiful. Maybe she could become a professional model, I thought, and made the mistake of saying so. Unfortunately, it started her on one of her favorite rampages. That's what I should have been, only I didn't have the right advice or someone who was sophisticated enough to take me to the right places. And what did I know? You have to have someone who's been places, who knows things to help you, who will guide you. That's why the choice of the man to marry and love is so important. You can't just let your heart tell you what to do. But it still might not be too late for me, she added, happily gazing in the mirror. The possibility cheered her. I just have to go to the right places and see the right people, she told me. She clapped her hands together and nodded. Yes, that's what I have to do. Her face beamed. She rushed back to the bedroom as if the right person were waiting there. I felt my heart flutter. A feather of fear tickled in the inside of my chest. It was one thing to dream and to wish for things once in a while. Daddy had taught me to hope for things and look forward to another tomorrow. But it was different if you lived in a world of wishes and never saw the reality of today and never cared about responsibilities. Mommy was getting more and more like that. After I did the dishes, I went to my homework. A short time later, I heard a knock on my door, and Mommy peeked in, still dressed in her new skirt and blouse. I'm going to town, she said. Leave the door unlocked. A car horn honked, and she was off. I didn't need to take two guesses of who she was with. What will become of us, I wondered. 2 days later, I got my answer. It was more shocking than anything I had expected.